Hello, everyone. This is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I, the Dragon, Cruel, Beautiful, Rabbit Hole, and King Dio. And having just finished Metroid Dread last night, I can safely say that, yeah, this is a new, solid entry in the Metroid franchise. If you haven't played it already, you really should go out and play it now. I don't want to say this is the best Metroid game in years, because it really isn't. I think it's behind Federation Force for me, and I think it's definitely behind Samus Returns. But I do think it's better than Zero Mission. I do think it has its place in the Metroid franchise, and I do think it's a relatively solid title in spite of not necessarily being one of the greats or even one of the all-time best Nintendo games. I think there are a couple of nitpicks with this title that I think really hold it back from becoming great. And I suppose that's the main thing I wanted to focus on in this video is just talk about my general misgivings when it comes to the game itself. And I think the thing that really the one to put it really simply, my problems condensed into like one single sentence is that Metroid Dread does not feel like it has its own identity. Like, going into this, I thought Metroid Dread would expand on like the stealth gameplay idea. I thought they would have a lot more. They would have a lot more versatility when it comes to like the enemies in their ability to come after you. I thought there would be a bit more of a horror element. I thought there would be all these aspects that radically radically change the way the game played in certain ways. And that's true to a certain extent, but it's not as interesting or unique as I would have hoped. In fact, I think it's kind of unpolished. Actually, the Emmy gameplay. There are only 7 of them in total, and you'll get like 2 of them in the first 5 minutes. Most of them aren't all that interesting. They're not all that aggressive. The level design isn't that great. The AI isn't that great. Getting around them isn't that difficult. They can only patrol a certain area. The Emmys just don't really add a whole lot to the game. They really don't. They all have unique powers. I barely noticed or cared. They'll chase you persistently. Like they're hard to avoid. If they try to grab you, they're hard to dodge. To counter, barely noticed or cared because the game just immediately resets. You can try again. Like, there's no feeling of risk. There's no feeling of like overcoming these things. Like, they're just kind of there, and it's unfortunately kind of a low point when it comes to the game, when it's supposed to be one of the game's premier features. Like, having these robots just chase you incessantly. It's not as interesting as I would like. And like, furthermore, like the return of certain the return of elements from previous games, stuff like environments radically changing or Kraid returning, like, they're not as interesting as you might like. There are some good aspects about them, like specifically Samus's animations and the cutscene direction, which I think are probably the best the series has ever been. But the fights themselves, a lot of the time, feel, I don't want to say lackluster. They're very difficult. They're very challenging. Probably not as challenging as some of the bosses in Samus Returns, but they're pretty solid regardless. But it doesn't quite feel like, especially after a certain point, like, it feels like they kind of stop putting out new, unique boss fights and just have you rehash stronger versions of a fight you've already been in, especially in the second half. It feels like they could have done a lot more with bosses and things like that. The final boss is great. Really great animation, a really challenging fight, but they really could have pushed it past the limit and really made it one of the best bosses of all time. That's kind of one of my feelings in this game as a whole, is that, like, it's good for what it is, but if they had tweaked it a little bit, if they had really made it really managed to make the enemy AI sophisticated, if they really had a bunch of bosses, a bunch of like secret bosses, if they had like a couple more unique power ups, if they had like just a little bit more of everything, a little bit better of everything, a couple, a little bit more tweaks, like this really could have been what like a 10 out of 10 game. But as it stands, I don't think I can really justify giving it a 10 out of 10. I don't think I like this as much as like New Pokemon Snap or Monster Hunter Rise or No More Heroes 3. Like they're I was expecting this to be a solid game, like one of the best games of the year. It still is, but like I think it trails way behind like all of those for me. Well, somewhat behind. Way behind is kind of an exaggeration. And I suppose that just goes to show you just how strong the Switch library actually is. When something this well received and this popular just kind of makes me go like, yeah, it's pretty good. Again, I'm not shitting on the game or anything like that. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying that, like, I love the game. I liked it a lot. But there are games that I would consider to be a lot better.